morning, everyone. My name is Andrea, and I will be serving as your host this morning. Today, I would like to introduce Doug King. He is the CIO at ePlus. He has an extensive leadership experience and expertise in IT strategy, informatics, product development, infrastructure services, technology assessment, and program implementation. And we also have with us Dan Nestor, who has been in the IT industry for over 18 years. Prior to his service with Okta, Dan worked with CA Technologies, Good Technology, Boxtone, and more. Without further ado, I would like to welcome our speakers, and Dan, I'll pass it off to you.
Thank you, Andrea. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, excellent. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Dan Nestor, as Andrea mentioned. I'm the Area Sales Director for the Mid-Atlantic region at Okta. And today we're gonna have a fireside chat around identity and access management, and specifically, what are the requirements that every CIO should consider in relation to identity and access management? Before we get into the discussion today with Doug, the CIO of ePlus, I do want to mention that we don't have the ability to take live questions from the audience via voice, right? So everybody's mic is muted. But we do have Jason Nelson from the ePlus security team who works for Doug, is going to be live answering questions via the chat panel. So if you do have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Jason will be answering them. If we do have time at the end, we'll certainly loop back around and answer a few of the more interesting ones live. So, so without further ado, Doug, welcome. It's my pleasure to be here with you today. If you could, just give everybody just a quick intro of yourself and ePlus, just to make sure everybo's familiar with you and your organization.
Yeah, good morning, Dan. Thanks, and really happy to be here. Appreciate you all having us. So, as was mentioned before, yeah, my name's Doug King. I'm the CIO of ePlus. I've been with the organization for about 2.5 years now. At ePlus, I oversee a group of approximately 80 employees and about 30 contractors responsible for business apps, custom software dev, enterprise architecture, infrastructure, and InfoSec. Quick commercial on ePlus. We're a global technology solutions and services provider. Our headquarters is in Herndon, Virginia, and we've got about a little over 1,500 employees worldwide. Our expertise is in ranges from security to cloud, data center, networking, collab, and emerging technologies. One of our recent focuses is what we call navigating the next. And whether that next be post-COVID or some other challenge, we're here to help our clients translate technology into business value. So again, Dan, thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's great to be here. So you mentioned a lot of different areas that you know, are in your purview as a CIO, and today we're here to talk about identity and access management. So what is it that makes identity and access management important to the CIO with so many different areas that you have responsibility for?
Yeah, so great question. I guess I would point to 3 things, Dan, that from my perspective that I think about when I think about IAM and why it's key. So first off, and I think for most CIOs today, you know, our agenda is built around value creation. That's driven by, you know, business outcomes, whether that is revenue growth or operational excellence, customer experience, cost optimization, any one of those business outcomes, they're all important. So first and foremost, IAM is important, I think, to the CIO's agenda because of its ability to enable the delivery of just about any of those outcomes. Second, I think IAM is important because of its ability to significantly increase an organization's, you know, security posture and its GRC profile. And then lastly, you know, as more and more CIOs are getting into the boardroom today, I think it's important for a CIO when they're communicating with the board to be able to reinforce that, you know, the organization's investments in security are returning positive ROI, and IAM is a big key to that.
Yeah.
So I guess, Dan, when I think about kind of, that's maybe from my perspective in ePlus, but what are you kind of hearing about when you're talking with Okta customers and prospects, you know, in the field? What are they saying about the importance of IAM?
Yeah, I mean, you know, IAM I look at as the central nervous system for your IT environment and for your business overall, right? Anything you're trying to access in this digital world is going through your identity management provider. And I think, the other things that we hear a lot from CIOs is it's one of the more visible projects that an IT team can go through, right? If you do, switch out your backup or your storage or your networking, right? A lot of times that is not very visible to the end user community, whereas identity is something that's very visible, right? I come in every day, I log into Okta. It's the first thing I do, right? Okta.okta.com, right? To get all the applications, right? So, it's a pretty visible IT project that has a pretty far-reaching impact. And, a lot of people think about it pretty simplistically, right? Being SSO focused. So, it would be interesting to hear your perspective. Like, what are the different components of IAM that you think are important, right? And what did you prioritize as you were launching into this project?
So I'll give three examples of kind of IAM that I think kind of go beyond the SSO MFA kind of perspective. They're important for ePlus. I think first was its ability to support our hybrid computing and cloud workload migration. Like many organizations, we're continuing to opportunistically, I'll call it, build a hybrid computing environment centered around cloud services, mobile apps. So IAM is a key enabler of that expansion, whether it's comprehensive user identity management, unified access policies, establishing trust and authority, all that is key to building out that expansion. Second, I think and why it's important to ePlus is the analytics that an IAM solution, provides. And that's probably one of the unsung heroes that doesn't get a lot of fanfare, but those analytics are important for auditing both corporate employee-owned devices, but also they work in concert really well with our SIM solution to detect access from unauthorized devices that we don't know about, but that we need to know about. And then finally, I would say, IAM is foundational in raising the bar and defending against cyber attackers attempting to gain unauthorized access to, ePlus systems, apps, and data. Knock on wood, that hasn't happened. And we think a big part of that is Okta and IAM.
Yeah. A quick question about analytics. So, you mentioned a few areas, but what types of data are you looking for in the analytics, and how do you really utilize that in a couple different use cases?
Yeah, so I think kind of a couple things that I think about, just the access to the logs and the audit trails that it provides about who's accessing what systems, what applications, what data, for how long, and from where. Obviously, that's important to us because it points to potentially trusted or untrusted access. And so while that's kind of from an operational perspective, provides us that single pane of glass, operational dashboard. But then even from an auditing and GRC perspective, that's information that enables us to sit down and talk with our internal auditors and our IT assurance teams to focus on where we need to, first of all, are we complying with our internal controls framework? But secondly, where can we make improvements, in that data consumption experience and that data access experience? So that's where those metrics come into play for us.
Yeah, that's cool. And a lot of people when they come to us, right, many times people will think of identity and think primarily SSO, right? Are you looking at beyond SSO, or what are the different components specifically around IAM that you guys evaluated?
So I think, for us, I guess maybe I would jump into LCM here, Dan, if that's okay to do, but, because for us, that's where the true power of the platform comes, right? And the ability to automate and orchestrate app workflow through the use of lifecycle management as a part of the overall identity strategy. So to do so from a singular management console, that helps us to avoid, management integration of multiple tools that we've had to historically use, for example, to manage specific lifecycle states, just, to pick on HR applications and provisioning access and rights and data to new hires. And we've historically had to use multiple applications and kind of daisy chain those together. Okta provides us that overall umbrella to be able to manage that through one application. And, when we were looking at Okta, one of the keys to that was the inventory of over, I think it's up to 120 or some now pre-integrated applications. That was a game changer for us, and the ability to kind of exploit true LCM in the environment. And I think what that does for any organization is it uncovers opportunities for business process reengineering. You made the point earlier that, identity and LCM, it's a lot more pervasive than people think about. And it really has the ability to get into reengineering business process and making an organization more efficient. So I'm kind of curious, what are you hearing kind of from your customers as to, why does LCM automation matter? And what are those components of IAM that you hear about most often that are most important?
Yeah, I mean, I think primarily, people think SSO and MFA primarily, which are certainly important. I think, specifically now in the environment we're in, where all your services are digital, they're cloud-based, right? You take an HR system, right? If you have Workday or UltiPro or a cloud-based HR system, if you don't have multi-factor authentication in front of that, like, you're just asking for a phishing attack, right? I think that's probably the more common phishing attack that we're seeing, is somebody throwing up a fake HR system and saying, hey, you need to reset your password, and then going in and changing your direct deposit information, right? So, things like that, like, you need to make sure you're taking care of that. But I think the more mature organizations from an identity standpoint are looking at onboarding, offboarding, people moving around, right? We call the joiner, mover, leavers, right? So who's joining the organization? How do you onboard them quickly? And a lot of it is perception of the organization, right? If you come in day one and you log in, you have access to everything that you'll need, right, during your orientation. It gives you a really good impression of the organization and the place that you're starting out, right? Whereas if, we talk to a lot of companies that it takes them 2 to 3 weeks sometimes to get all the systems up and running with tickets and whatnot, if it's a manual process, to get everybody access to what they need to, right? So really automating that process on the front end gives a good, it streamlines your business process, right? And it takes the manual steps out of it, gives a good impression to the new employees. And on the back end, if it takes you a couple days to deprecate an account after somebody leaves, well, you just open a gaping security hole in your environment that is going to, people can, they're pissed off, they're leaving, right? They might try and want to access something that they shouldn't and do something, malicious, right? You hope that doesn't happen, but that's, it does, right? So making sure that you're closing the security loop on the back end is certainly an important piece of that lifecycle management.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So no, agree. Okay.
And how does, like, you look at kind of across your organization, right? IAM, I think for a lot of times has been thought of as a very security centric solution, right? Which it is to a large degree, but I think as you broaden out the scope, it impacts a lot of different constituents that you have around the IT organization. So, I'd love to hear your perspective of how does it impact the different IT groups that you have, and how does it impact the broader community within ePlus?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. And I think I'll start with the business, Dan, and kind of outside of IT, because in most businesses, just like ours, data is key, right? It's so critical, and that's just the same at ePlus. So from a predictive and prescriptive analytics perspective, both those are very important for us in running our business on a day-to-day basis. The ability to provide what we call kind of a reliable and consistent data consumption experience for our users, whether they are in sales ops or data operations or sales and service, whatever it may be, providing that consistent experience for our users. And translated, it's the right data to the right people for the right reason at the right time in a secured fashion. And I think people may underestimate one, how critical or how important that is to make happen, and two, maybe they underestimate the complexity of making that happen. So for us, identity is at the heart of delivering the data experience, and that data experience is about making an organization data driven and making their decisions based on that. So so that's kind of within the business. I think within our IT team, identity is pervasive. Just about everything we do. We talked about all the different areas within our IT organization. A couple of examples. I'll go back to kind of the cloud workload as we continue to migrate apps and workloads to the cloud. We were doing a lot of that pre-COVID, but now it's even more, pervasive, almost, post-COVID, a lot of people doing it too. Our environment has become ever increasingly complex to manage and maintain due to that diversified, tech footprint and computing environments, and identity is right at the heart of that. And then secondly, we're a big custom software dev shop. We do a lot of custom software development work, both internal as well as customer facing. We push a lot of apps to our customers for online procurement, et cetera. And as such, privileged account management is key to the overall health of our app architecture, right? So managing service accounts and privileged accounts and making sure that those are operating correctly and in a secure fashion is really important to the overall health of our dev lifecycle. And then last, I'll go back to the GRC perspective, because first I covered the business, then IT. I'll come back to GRC, and risk management. Identity is core to the management and execution of our internal controls and compliance framework. And Okta helps us to build strong policies and programs around data classification, which is really important these days to keep pace with, the ever-changing landscape of data privacy, that's all over the map today, and all those regulations that are constantly changing and in flux. So IAM is a big part of that. And then secondly, IAM helps us with, comprehensive visibility. And as I mentioned before, it's that auditing and reporting in support of our IT assurance program. So, so we see it running everywhere, whether it's in the business with analytics or in our IT group and software dev or in our risk management team, from GRC, it's definitely an enabler. So I guess I'm curious as to, are those some of the same themes, or are there other themes that you're hearing from customers as to how identity impacts their business and their IT ecosystems?
No, I think you're in line with where we see the market, right? It's always interesting, right, from the vendor side when you go into a new prospect that's launching an identity product to see who's in the room, right? Is it mostly security architects, or are they thinking about it a little bit more holistically, right? That'll give you some indication of kind of, who they're pulling into the evaluation is a lot of times an indication of like what the requirements are going to bear and how they view identity, right? So, and I think especially when you start thinking of identities that exist, not just for your employees, but for your partners and your customers and your suppliers and the broader ecosystem of people you're interacting with, I think the more you kind of involve or include identity in those conversations, it expands the scope, right? Whether it's development that, hey, I'm building an application for ePlus customers that they can log in and order something or get an invoice or, check this payment status or something along those lines, right? All of a sudden now you have developers that need to build identity and authentication and authorization into an application that you're authoring, right? Yeah. So I think the more people start thinking about identity, not just for their workforce, but also for people outside the organization, I think it certainly expands the scope of what we're seeing and, makes it a much more complex problem, right? Because they don't have Active Directory accounts and they're not people that have access to certain things. And it opens up some security questions that I think need to be answered when you're giving remote access. But it does have a huge impact to, streamlining the way you interact with your customers. I think that's what we're seeing, that even though everybody hates the term digital transformation, right? That's what it is, right? I mean, it's transforming the way that people are interacting with your environment. So, and with, I think, those buzzwords like digital transformation and zero trust get thrown around a lot. I'd be curious, like from a security standpoint, zero trust is something that we hear a lot about. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on how you define it and what are the elements that you think it has within your environment.
Yeah, so I think, everybody's got a different definition of that, and, at ePlus, I think for us, it's, we think about that defense in depth and providing that security and that contingency at every single layer, in the stack. And so, identity is at the heart of that. When I go back to talking about, people accessing the applications they're supposed to access, and assuming that, or making the assumption that there should be, across the organization, kind of a pervasive approach, to right data, right access, right times, and that there shouldn't be any trust, associated with that. And so, that kind of gets back to those unified access policies that we talked about earlier and wanted to make sure that we are defining and designing those in the most robust fashion. And I think, before a tool and before a platform, kind of one of the things that we think about from the zero trust perspective is it's about, having the right policy and the right program and the right approach. And then once you have that, then go find the platform to enable that. Because I think so many people think I'll go buy some great platform for DLP or whatever it may be, and I'll slap it in. And it's going to make sure that, I don't lose any data and that, it prevents unauthorized access. And it doesn't happen that way. Right. So for us, it's about a strong policy, a strong program, and a strong approach, and then the right platform, again, which is where Okta kind of came into, the mix. And so, but there is no one kind of silver single bullet to that. And I think overall, that's really what we think most, about zero trust is it's a pie with multiple pieces that have to come together and work really well.
Yeah, I think that's as good a definition as I've heard. Usually you ask 10 people, you get 10 different definitions of it. So I appreciate that. And speaking of platform selection, obviously, I'm up here hosting the fireside chat. So obviously you picked Okta as your platform of choice, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that's a surprise, but I'd love to hear, like, as you look at kind of your decision and what went into the process and as you're doing vendor evaluation, what was it that made you select Okta? What were the requirements you're looking at? And what did you think made Okta unique to handle those needs?
Yeah, so I think, there was a lot of things we were looking for, right? Given where we were coming from and what we wanted to go to. But I think I'd boil it down to kind of four main requirements that we had, and for us kind of heading into the evaluation, we had kind of mapped out our IT strategy and we had said, look, LCM and IAM need to be cornerstones of that strategy moving forward. And given that, what are we looking for? And that, like I said, came down to four main requirements. And I'd say that, the first being, the number one here, the most important was we needed a partner and we needed a platform that could, serve as a foundation for scalable growth that would provide alignment between our IT strategy and the overall ePlus growth strategy. So as our organization looks to grow and expand, both organically and through acquisition, over the coming years, we needed a platform and a partner who could go on that journey with us. So that was first and foremost in our evaluation, and Okta definitely was there in that regard. Secondly, platform standardization. I think you probably hear that from a lot of your customers, and eliminating the challenge of deploying and integrating and managing multiple point solutions, which we had in our environment prior to Okta. And then third, I'd go to end user experience. You talked about Dan coming in every day and logging in, and Okta's at the heart of what everybody does every day. And so that end user experience needed to be seamless, it needed to be efficient, and it needed to be consumable. And then last, cost reduction. That was probably our fourth, kind of main requirement that led us to make the decision that we did, and that we're really, really happy with.
Yeah. So, you mentioned cost reduction as the final one. I think that's a lot of times when we're working with customers, right, there's a lot of interest in evolving this, right, but they struggle to build the business case for it.
Yeah.
Right. So I'd be curious about, like, when you go through and look at, like, how do you build the business case for all of those different things and say, yes, it's going to give us the platform for growth and everything else, but how do you do the cost justification, and how do you build the business case for identity? I think that's an area where a lot of the people that we work with, we certainly try and help them, but they struggle with that internally.
Yeah. So I think, we kind of focus on and talk a lot about ePlus, business outcomes. And I mentioned that earlier, and, enabling the delivery of business outcomes. So we based our business case around what I would say are three business outcomes. The first was business growth, and kind of call it value creation. But basically, I think of this as the concept of 1 + 1 needs to be greater than or equal to 3. And translated, that's the ability to efficiently and dynamically scale our environment, to support the growth requirements of the business. And again, as we go out and we, look to acquire businesses, we need to be able to provide that secured access to the right data at the right time for those new users, but we need to be able to dynamically onboard, offboard, provision rights and access to new people in a very quick and dynamic fashion to support that growth. And so that was really important to us in building the business case and being able to demonstrate that Okta could help us to do that. Secondly, I would say the second component of the business case, or the second business outcome, was operational efficiency. So I mentioned earlier kind of the ease of deployment, ease of maintenance, enabled by a single integrated platform. And part of that operational efficiency, Dan, was the improved user experience and the self-service capabilities, right? The ability to kind of take that drag off of IT, and let the users be able to self-serve, on a day-to-day basis. That was really important for, at least for our organization, and making sure we were being more efficient. And then last, go to the cost reduction comment that you made earlier. When you look at all the spend, going across kind of that whole identity continuum, whether you were doing it, completely right or not, prior to that, if you look at all that aggregate spend and you put it into one integrated IAM LCM product versus dropping money on 3 or 4 or 5 different products to manage life states and identity, overall, it's a pretty easy argument to make, and then it improves your metrics around IT expense as a % of revenue. So, if the slope of that revenue line was this, and the IT expense line was this, we were looking to lower the slope of that IT expense line, and Okta's helped us to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great to hear. A lot of times we go in and we call, or I see what I call the Frankenstein approach to identity, right? It's like 5 or 6 different pieces that are stitched together. And, you know, there's obviously gaps that come with that from a security standpoint at sometimes, but you can make a pretty good business case around cost reduction of platform consolidation. Like that's a pretty big driver for us.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely can.
Did you have metrics around like things like what a password reset cost you previously and how much the reduction was? Did you get to that level of granularity when you built the business case?
So we had metrics associated with it, but they probably weren't, not all those metrics were monetized, right? So we had metrics associated with how much time dedicated internally to IT from, from our service desk and looking at tickets and incidents associated with those. And then we would group and bucket those. And then we would try to look at the, first call resolution time associated with those tickets. And then we would try to do an average dollar amount and monetize that, right? So,
yeah.
But as we all know, those are probably not hard costs, that you can necessarily look to say they're going to drop out because you're probably going to reallocate those people to other initiatives. So that's more of a soft cost benefit. But on the same time, there's definitely hard costs that come away when you look at all those disparate platforms kind of in your Frankenstein model that have maintenance associated with them, and ongoing professional services because of issues where you had to bring in the provider to do work, so on and so forth. So we were able to combine both of those, the hard savings and the soft savings, and to build that case. So, but you bring up a really great point. What are you seeing in the market with your other customers? Are they able to monetize those metrics? And if so, or are there other metrics they're using to drive their business cases?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes it's dependent on the organization, right? I think the easiest one is reduction of help desk calls, right? There's a tangible cost associated with that. I do think, there's also, we work hard with our customers to try and put together ROI around what does it really mean to automate a process as opposed to creating tickets, right? That gets a little bit more complicated because you have to figure out, well, who's getting the ticket and what's their average cost and how much time are they spending with it. And sometimes it's a multi-step workflow. But if customers are interested in going through that exercise, we have some industry standard tools that we can put together an ROI around what does automation really mean to your business, right?
Yeah.
Not only from a perception standpoint to the end users, but from a cost standpoint, right? How do you justify it, right? What cost is it taking out? And it can get a little soft cost, right? It's recapturing time from some of your engineers or application owners, right? But I do think there is a tangible aspect to it, and we can help build the business case for it. And I think that, the other thing is, and I think this came up a little bit with ePlus, right? When, there's certain drivers of identity, right? And there's certain things, compelling events that happen, right? One of which is an acquisition, right? Or a divestiture, right?
Yeah.
So when there's a company event like that and you go through and you acquire another company, right? It used to be, right? And we're all old enough to remember this, right? You acquire a company and then throw a bunch of money and people in a room and be like, figure out how to make all this stuff work together, right? Yeah. And you would get a big budget associated with it. And there's a cost, right? About integrating environments. And I think, if it is the nature of your business to grow inorganically and acquire companies, right? We've seen a lot of our customers get a lot of benefit out of just putting Okta, right, which is a cloud service. It sits above the domain level. You can access multiple environments simultaneously, and it's really seamless to the end user, right? So getting a sales rep to be able to access a quote in the ePlus quoting system if they're at a newly acquired company or something like that, those types of use cases really help streamline the integration process around M&A. And there's a tangible return on that, both from a cost standpoint, a perception standpoint, and from a, just user experience standpoint, right?
Yeah, no, I can definitely see that. And I think even in post-COVID environments, I mean, obviously there's probably been, to some degree, some slowdown on M&A, but, at some point in time, that's going to resume. And I think people need to be well positioned coming out of it to make that, as efficient a process as possible.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, and COVID is dominated 2020 here like nothing else. So obviously it's changed the way that we've worked and it's changed the way we're accessing, right? I'd love to hear your perspective of like how was the Okta rollout, right? Obviously, with every company has been changed dramatically since March when everybody was kind of forced to do a mandatory work from home, and we're still kind of struggling with when do we get back to normal and what that really looks like, which is a discussion for another day. But, how did you guys transition to, well, first of all, how was your Okta rollout? And then I'd love to hear your perspective on like, as you started to transition people to more of a remote and work from home environment, what was that like? And how did Okta help you in the process?
Yeah, sure. So I think, so first I'll talk about the rollout. I think, when we built our initial rollout plan, actually, it only had 2 phases, and actually now we're into the third. And I'll go through each one here, but each of them's going really well. We're very happy with that. The first one, was really kind of centered around the theme of MFA everywhere, and I know we talked earlier about that. Kind of being, kind of more the baseline or foundational component of the platform, but it was really important to us in kind of deploying our MFA everywhere strategy. And And in a little less than 12 months, we've integrated over 70 different applications and services to the Okta framework. And so, for us, that has been a really, great pace. We're very excited about it. And I'll be honest with you, when we started this, Dan, I had no preconceived thoughts around the fact that we'd be able to go as fast as we've been able to go. So 70 apps, and actually we just began last December. So we're 10 months in now.
Yeah.
So I'm incredibly thrilled with that. Phase 2, which we had kind of identified at the beginning, was around that privileged access management and working to optimize the internal GRC program, at ePlus and build upon that. We were really pleased with our internal program and our internal controls posture, but we saw an opportunity for Okta to take that to another level. So, and in that same phase, we're also working towards enabling SSO and federation and strong authentication, into our customer-facing apps, which actually is, I'm kind of merging your questions and answers here, but in kind of the post-COVID, mode, that's been really important for us, is to bring that together as we continue to serve up more functionality and data to our customers. Having that federation and strong authentication has been, even more and more important. So, and then lastly, phase 3. So this is a phase that we didn't have identified, when we began the process. But this goes back to what we talked about before with, lifecycle management and exploiting the power of the platform. So as we continue to migrate more workloads to the cloud, and again, now this is coming up, kind of post-COVID, and as we look to do that for both operational efficiency as well as cost savings and optimization, I didn't necessarily see this before, but Okta is now, an integral part of that migration process as we build unified access policies. We saw that opportunity, but it's really about leveraging LCM to enhance our, the user onboarding, offboarding, and as I talked before, the business process, kind of re-engineering. This is where Okta comes to the table, I think, and brings the ability to innovate. They've helped us to expand our thinking. And I think they brought different kinds of partnership opportunities to the table to help us and show us how to not only grow our business, but in the post-pandemic mode, how to secure our business in a better way. And again, none of us would have thought that we would be faced with the times that we're faced with right now. And probably none of us would have thought we would be faced with kind of the security use cases that we're faced with right now. But Okta has done more than step up, in that regard, to help us to see new ways to, to manage that. So, yeah. But I am curious to see kind of what are you hearing from other customers, as to how they're dealing in the post-pandemic world. How are they leveraging Okta, exploiting Okta in, in new and different ways? Yeah.
It's been an interesting year in a lot of respects, right? That's probably the understatement of the year. But yeah, from our perspective, like, I think, we've had a couple companies that have come to us, and I think when you got through March, right, everybody was just like, I got to do what I can with what's in the boat right now. Like, what I have right now is what I got, right? So I got to figure out how to make the best. And I think you got into people like doing optimizations of remote access and things like that. And and as the pandemic has kind of gone on, and the remote work has been persisting and seems to be, going to be the way of the future in a lot of respects. But, I think people have really taken a step back and said, was I really prepared for that, right? Did I have a good identity and remote access strategy initially, right? Because I think the people that did transition pretty quickly, and we certainly had a lot of customers that transitioned very well. And if they had a new application they had to spin out, whether it was, Zoom or some other session, some other application to help with remote access or collaboration, as you mentioned, right, Okta makes it pretty easy to do that.
Right.
It is, I think in places where companies really struggled to transition, a lot of it had to do with the fact that they had a pretty brittle identity and access management approach, right? And I think that, sometimes it's hard to convey, like, what is the real benefit of having something that can deploy easily and effectively? And I think, when a pandemic hits, it's like, it's an emergency situation from an IT standpoint, right? To make sure that everybody has the right access, the right tools, and if you're not prepared for it and you have kind of a brittle approach to identity, it's going to impact the business. Right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So we're seeing a lot of companies now that are going back and saying, I lived through that, right? There's got to be a better way to do it, right? That are coming to, that are kind of reevaluating the way that they're doing identity. So, it's been, certainly been an interesting year.
Absolutely.
So, There is, so you mentioned a little bit of the results, right? I think we probably covered that. Do you feel like you got like the business case that you have, right? It's always interesting to see this, right? We work pretty hard pre-sale, right, to make sure you put together the justification of the business, right? After, a year into this migration, do you feel like you've achieved the ROI? Do you feel like you've gotten the business value that you thought? And is there anything that was surprising, either positively or negatively, that you've learned in the last year?
Yeah, I would say to this point in time, Dan, I'll go back to kind of the criteria that we laid out for our business case. Absolutely. I mean, I think we, from the standpoint of the ability to scale the business and grow, since the time we, launched the Okta, project, I think we've now seen that, and I talked about the slope of those lines. We've seen the ability for us to reduce, IT expense as a percent of revenue, and go back to the different hard costs and soft costs that Okta has contributed, to that. And as you talked about, making our group more operationally, efficient, and the reduction in time associated with whether it's password resets or those different types of things, and pushing that into the user base. So I think from the hard and soft cost perspective, definitely operational efficiency, no doubt. The fact that we've been able to migrate, like I said, 70 applications in 10 months. And this thing, it's just fantastic. I mean, like I said, I never thought that we'd be able to move as fast as we've been able to move. And that's always a great, statement for an IT organization to be able to make, that we're moving faster than we ever thought we could move. And our team loves that, and they're excited and motivated by the fact that we can make this pervasive, kind of throughout our environment. And then, I'll say just kind of some anecdotal feedback, when you get highly respected, kind of field engineers, and I'm talking about some folks at ePlus that, work with day in and day out, who are, top notch in their field and best in class. And they send you an instant message that says, it's just random. It says, I just want to let you know that how great the Okta deployment was and how much it's improved my daily work routine. That alone kind of speaks volume when it comes from a security or a collaboration engineer, or even more so like, sales folks, because, who in their past life, wants to, pick this thing up and, punch 10 different passcodes through 3 different applications to get to just HR to kind of download their pay stub or whatever, right? So you hear that now from people, and it's like, gosh, this thing's amazing. And just what, and it's not us. All we did was kind of integrate the apps. It's you all and your platform, and how, how awesome it is that yeah, so we've definitely achieved that anticipated ROI. I think the things that we're most excited about now, though, are the things that we didn't anticipate that we would use or exploit when we, when we made the Okta selection. And I go back to the LCM piece, the opportunities that lie ahead for us in that regard. I think those are really exciting. So
yeah, it's good. And I've been at Okta for 4 years, and I think one of the things that has been very pleasantly surprising are the number of customers that we have that say the same thing, right? I came from an environment, right? And then, you can read my background, they said it, right? I came from an environment that sold a legacy identity provider. And if you wanted to add an application, we would send you a professional services person and an invoice for, 15 grand and say, let's integrate your new application, right? And it is, getting to the point where it's streamlined and easy enough so that your team can just take ownership and say, hey, we want to add applications. Like, we know how to do this. We can continuously just knock out all of these different applications. You have a new application, great, we can roll it out. And I think, sometimes it's hard to convey that, the ease of integration to new applications, like, what does that really mean to the environment? And I think you summarized it quite well. So we do have a question that I think would be interesting to hear your perspective on. So the question is, with the craziness of 2020, why would you say IAM deserves to be prioritized over other security initiatives, or over initiatives overall? Or said in a different way, why now? Like, we talked why Okta, we talked about the business case. Like, why now? What would be the importance of kind of prioritizing it over some of the other things that, come across your desk every day?
Yeah, so some of this may be a little bit of repeat what we talked about before, but and I like the intro to the question, the craziness of 2020, and basically thinking about COVID and how our world has changed, and both organizations, end users, et cetera. Going back to the discussion about, and I'll look in the question here and it says, why does it get prioritized over other security initiatives? I don't look at it as a security initiative. I look at it as a business initiative, right? And you talked about, Dan, when you evaluate the platform, it's interesting to see who comes in the room, right, to participate in that evaluation. I think whether it's about, the data, data is more important than ever. And we talked about those analytics and access to the data at the right time for the right people. It's more important than ever to be able to make the right decisions, quickly and in an informed fashion, kind of in this post-COVID world. And the key to making those decisions is data. And the key to getting that data, is an IAM, it's identity, and making sure that is delivered in the right fashion. So I think, again, more about security. It's all about the business and that data. Now, then I'm looking inward though, within IT, post-COVID, ePlus, like other organizations that I'm sure out there, we're looking to move more and more workloads to the cloud. There's opportunities to gain operational efficiencies there. There's opportunities for cost reduction there. And as a part of that, we're creating a more complex environment, whether we're moving more from on-prem into the cloud, or we're running things in Azure and AWS or Google, and we're trying to connect across all those clouds. It's a lot more complex to manage than it's ever been before. And again, identity is at the heart of managing that, that complexity. So whether you are, a shop that is completely migrated and you're full cloud, or you're hybrid, or whatever it may be, identities, is going to be critical to making that a more manageable environment going forward. And it's not going to change, so I think the longer you wait, the more difficult it will be to jump into that. So what are your thoughts on that, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes back to something you started the conversation with, which is identity is at the heart of almost everything you're doing, and it touches a lot of applications, and it's a central piece of almost everything you're trying to do from an IT standpoint, right? I think if you really believe that the perimeter is gone and the new perimeter is the user, right, and their access is really the kind of foundation to your security protocol, then you got to make sure it's right? You got to make sure the foundation is there, and it's the right platform, and it's nimble enough, and it's modern enough to deal with kind of the hybrid world, right? As much as you're moving things to the cloud, you're going to have a legacy environment for the foreseeable future, right? That's the reality of it, right? As much as you're trying to reduce the data center costs, very few organizations have actually gotten there, right? So you have to be able to handle the cloud services and the provisioning and the access controls for them, but also the on-premise environments as well. And I think that's the piece that, I think certainly a lot of people are focused on, right? How do I make myself nimble enough from an identity standpoint so that if I need to deal with an acquisition, or deal with a new application, or deal with some new business process, I, as an IT leader, have the ability and the tools and the framework to be able to do that in at the speed the business requires. I think that's the foundation of it, right? And I think this is, I'll go back to what I said before. The biggest thing that was highlighted through the shift to remote work in the spring was, if you had the right foundation in place, it wasn't that hard, right? It was certainly challenging in certain respects, but the organizations that traverse that very well, I think, had the right foundation in place. And I think you got to set yourself up with some of these foundational elements that are correct. So, So here's another question. What would you say are the 3 challenges within IAM that businesses face, right? What are the solutions to overcome those challenges? It's an interesting question. So what are your thoughts on that?
I will, maybe one of the things I'll speak to, and I don't know if it's per se an IAM challenge or not, but I think one thing is, kind of in the deployment process, I think you have to be very careful in how you go about this, because I think it can be, or I guess I'll just say crawl, walk, run, in thinking about how you deploy. So maybe that's not necessarily a challenge of IAM, but it is a challenge, associated with deployment, and making sure that you're picking those applications off in a calculated fashion or concerted fashion in order to get consensus with that type of a strategy when it's brand new to your organization. For example, within ePlus, we had platforms, we had legacy platforms that we used. So the concept wasn't necessarily something brand new, but I could imagine if an organization was introducing identity for the first time, both in IT and the business, there could be stumbling blocks and hurdles that you'd have to overcome. If you turn the screws too tight, that whole thing about right access, the right data, the right people at the right time, people can kind of look at that as, hey, I lost access to the data that I need. And it's like, hey, wait a minute, back the truck up. You went a little too hard. Secondly, I think, believe it or not, I think in organizations today, and I love this about Okta, the mobility aspect, of the platform. There are in organizations where BYOD is pervasive and there's not company provision devices, there are people who aren't comfortable having applications put on their phone, right? And they may resist that. And so there is change management and user behavior that you may have to, work through in some hurdles to deploy IAM. I guess I'm speaking, Dan, from some of our particular, thought processes and discussions at ePlus as we went through the deployment process, making sure we thought through all those. I guess, are you seeing, hearing, kind of other challenges from your customers that they're facing with IAM and maybe how they overcame those?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because identity and access is not a new phenomenon, right? There's been products around to dealing with this challenge for years. Now the dynamics have changed pretty dramatically since, there was a big push to the cloud and remote work. And I think some of those aspects have changed. But I think, one of the things that I see is something you alluded to, and I'll phrase it a little bit differently, which is you need to make sure you understand kind of what you're capable of consuming as you're kind of dealing with your rollout, right? You don't want to, like, when you get to, dealing with SSO and MFA, like for a specific set of cloud applications, like that's generally phase one, right? And you should think about it like that, right? Getting to fully automated lifecycle management, provisioned or privileged access, right? Some of the more advanced use cases you were talking about, identity for your customers and suppliers, right? Don't try and tackle that right out of the gate, right? Phase it out, right? We live in a world where people talk about DevOps and agile and whatnot. It's iteration, right? It's not trying to consume too much at any given time. And I think some of the challenges I think people see are they try and overscope the initial phases of it, right? It's like, this is, start with what is relevant to you and what you can consume. And go from there. And I think that's really one of the things that I see. Like, understand your organization and what you can consume. The other thing is, I think we see a lot of people that, even for something like multi-factor authentication, which has become a relative standard that people are used to, whether they're, logging into their bank or logging into wherever they are, right? Getting the 6-digit code texted to you. Like, that's a pretty normal process.
Yeah.
It's interesting that a lot of organizations, that don't have that rolled out pervasively will worry about either the change of what they have or rolling it out initially to their end users. And sometimes there's a fear that, like, oh my God, it's going to be so disruptive. But if you do it in the right way and you communicate effectively and you're giving your end users the right tools to log in pretty quickly, it's actually a kind of a non-event. Like, people just do it, they expect it, and they understand that security, is part of our world these days, right? And everybody has to take part in it, right? So I think as long as you're handling the end user communication effectively, I think it really streamlines that process. So I would encourage people, if you do have an identity project, think about how you're communicating to the end users, because it is pretty visible and it is going to touch every user. And that's the expectation, and that's really what it does. So,
yeah. And I think you brought up a good point, Dan, there about, when organizations do kind of deploy an IAM strategy and IAM program, I think the communication piece is really important, and making sure that they understand that it's not just a stop, drop, and roll kind of technology deployment. You really need to make sure you're communicating to the organization the value behind this and how it's going to help them and what it means. You'll get that adoption.
Yeah. And this is a really interesting question, right? So, this is obviously the title of this is, why the CIO should consider it, right? This is from an engineer. If I'm an engineer and I'm interested in identity, how do I take it to the C level and promote it as critical? And Doug, what would you want to hear from your team around the importance of IAM? So maybe it would be interesting to hear kind of who led the initiative around IAM inside your organization, and then, to the question, like, what would you expect, or what would you like to see from your team if they're bringing this up and trying to get it prioritized?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, I talked about the, kind of some of the drivers behind identity, at ePlus, and within our organization, you know, there obviously it started within IT, but we did bring people from the business, you know, into that evaluation. But within my organization, you know, I think I remember I was talking to someone recently about that, and they said, "Well, wasn't it just your security team?" And I said, "No, actually, security team was, you know, was definitely, you know, right at the core of that." But it was our IT services, our ops, our infrastructure, our product management team that manages all of our COTS platforms and all the different cloud, you know, applications that we have, as well as our software development team. And all of those teams were raising their hand because they're saying this is, you know, it was kind of like, you know, you hear people talk about cost avoidance. This was pain avoidance. It's like we're getting so complex and we have so many priorities that we're trying to deploy, initiatives we're trying to complete. We need something that's going to help us with this because we can't manage this anymore. The access to data is becoming too pervasive and too, you know, ubiquitous. We need a tool that's going to help us do that. I was hearing that from our software dev team and our product management team, whether it's data warehouses or, you know, data cube type applications, and then the security team and the IT services team, like you were talking before, Dan, talking about password resets and the ability to manage the security in the environment. We need something better, and we can't manage 3 or 4 different tools like we're managing today and keep trying to daisy chain them together. So, you know, from my team's perspective and the engineers that work in our organization, it was that pain avoidance conversation, which then would translate into the benefit that a unified integrated platform will bring us. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? You know, I think sometimes we hear engineers that say, I really want this, but I'm struggling to take it up the food chain because it's, you know, the message of, hey, it's really hard for me to add an application. Like sometimes, you know, from the executive standpoint, they say, quantify that for me.
Yeah.
Right? What does that mean? Right. Tell me the impact to the business. Tell me the impact to other projects. Tell me the impact that, you know, some of those kind of pains have across the business. Right. And I think, you know, it sounds like what you were saying, not to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like what you were saying is make sure you're looking at it holistically and you understand kind of all the different elements and areas that it touches, and think about what that impact has from an IT standpoint and from a user standpoint.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, I'll throw a little plug in for your team here, Dan.
Yeah.
Kudos to the Okta sales and, you know, PS and engineering organizations. I mean, when they, you know, came and approached ePlus with this, and we had that conversation about, you know, not only the business case, but, you know, what problem are you trying to solve? You know, your team was great in kind of putting together proof of concepts that were real world, you know, for ePlus. So it wasn't some hypothetical use case. It wasn't with some hypothetical data and conceptual application. It was a real world use case, or 2 or 3 that you demonstrated to the ePlus team, and it helped us to open our eyes and go, wow, right? That's powerful. So if we can do that in our environment, that's definitely what we want to do. So again, throwing a little plug to your team for making it real, so to speak, in that evaluation process.
Yeah, well, I certainly appreciate that. And, you know, it's always interesting from the vendor side because, you know, we go into a lot of different organizations, and every organization has a different personality and different culture, right? Some are very forthcoming, some are very closed, some are very progressive, some are not, right? So you get a sense of, you know, who really values their vendor partnerships and looks at them as real partners in what they're trying to do. And I think you and the ePlus team were certainly very transparent and forthcoming and helpful in that process. And I think the partnership has worked quite well. So much appreciated from our side. We are almost out of time. We're at 10:53. I don't know, Jason, if there's any other questions that have come through that you think are pertinent for us to answer. And if not, then we could probably close out. Maybe. All right. I think we're good to go. So with that, I would say, Doug, thank you very much. Much appreciated. Very much appreciate the partnership. I think this was a good discussion. Hopefully people got something out of it. And any final closing remarks from your side?
No, just want to thank you very much for having us, and thanks to the conference for having us this morning. Really enjoyed the conversation, and you know, we look forward to expanding that ROI that we talked about, Dan. And
absolutely,
as we grow that partnership with ePlus and Okta. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. Everybody have a good Halloween this weekend. Turn your clocks back. Don't forget, and appreciate your attendance. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.